A very good evening, a warm welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine Live with Norman Goodfellows. Welcome to this week's show, and welcome to a bit of an adventure, because we're leaving, in a metaphorical sense at least, the confines of the Dan Really Likes Wine cellar, and instead bounding up the west coast to a part of South Africa that just gets more and more and more exciting when it comes to wine. They're a collection of really cool winemakers who just started to appear on the broader radar and are making an incredible impact. And I've tried a number of them over the years, but my real introduction to them en masse as one big happy collective was having lunch last year out at Wolfgat, the award-winning acclaimed restaurant. Cove and his team, who've got such a fierce and devoted insistence on ensuring that everything they give you is local. And that's not just the ingredients. They go foraging and find random bits of foliage and toss them into different dishes, and well, the effect is remarkable. But they also focus on local wine, and the wine list for that particular day was enjoyed by myself, by Andrew Harris out of DGB, and formerly Ernie Els, Damien Winchubert, Dele Graaf, formerly Waterford, amongst others, Zoe Smith, who's worked in all manner of wine spaces over the years, and myself. And although all four of us have got a fairly extensive history of drinking wine from around South Africa in particular, there were a number of wines that we had never tried before. In fact, one or two we'd never heard of before. And coupled with a really good article I read not too long ago from Elu Lambert, I felt, right, time to head up the West Coast and discover exactly what is making this region quite so exciting. And so I've got three guests from the West Coast who will be joining me on the show today. Also, though, I have a fourth guest who's joining me because there's a rather cool, if slightly exclusive event coming up on the Dan Really Likes Wine calendar next month at the Old Oak at Royal Johannesburg. What is that event? How is the West Coast doing so well? All of that's coming in just a moment. But first up, here's some of the latest wine news. Well, this is Mother's Day lunch. This is not a good one to forget. 14th of May, and this is going to be out at South Hill in Elgin, where they do some lovely wine, but their food is also a huge attraction, and you can see the menu sitting there on the right. I'm a bit of a sucker for French onion soup, so that would probably be top of my list, followed by some pork belly, which looks nice and healthy for me. But whatever you want, that's a really nice spot to get out to in Elgin. It's not too far to drive if you're in Cape Town. If you're a little closer to the winelands of Elgin, then you'll be on the doorstep, or if you're heading down from somewhere like Hermanus. So this is out at South Hill. So if you head over to their website, you can book yourself a spot for a Mother's Day extravaganza, 14th of May. And even if you are not going to this one, make sure you put the date in your diary if you haven't already. Do not miss Mother's Day. It is a very, very bad mistake to make. Up there with birthdays and wedding anniversaries is probably the worst of the lot. So Mother's Day lunch coming up at South Hill. Then at Culture. Now this is really exciting. This is happening next Thursday, and one of my guests this evening is going to be part of this celebration. First Thursdays have become a massive event in Cape Town, and normally Cape Townians start their weekend a little earlier than most, but it definitely kicks off on a Thursday evening when it is the first Thursday of the month, and that Culture Wine Bar will be absolutely packed and humming. Next Thursday, the 4th of May, we have a Dan Really Likes Wine takeover, and we have got some terrific people doing the takeover. Sakkie Mouton, who is on the show this evening, will be joining me. He's going to be pouring some of his full-on misfit. Barine Sauls is making the trek in from Tessa Larsdal out in the Himalaya Valley to pour some of her Pinot Noir. Alexandra McFarlane, who you saw on the show last week, has got a very interesting Cinsault Semillon blend. So she is going to be pouring that through the course of the evening. Christian van Arnhem, who's taken over as CEO of Warwick, been there a little while now. She's going to be pouring some 2016 Cabernet Franc from Warwick, and I think Warwick have done Cabernet Franc as a single varietal just about as well as anyone. And I think it was Norma Radcliffe who gave us our first South African single varietal, so that will be on show. Then Bolange will be coming in from Dalheim, her brand new Riesling, the Riesling with the Bee Gees title that has been made in partnership with the Germans. It's a really cool wine. And so that one is going to be poured as well. Then Manuel from Element House is going to be pouring The Element by the glass, their own blend that Erica Obermeyer has created. And wrapping up for an added touch of stardust, Ciabello Senacla, the Wine Mad, Stormers and Blitzbox Wing is going to be pouring his 7 varietal blend Glory, made for him with Idiom. 7 varietals. He played for the Sevens team, so that all comes together nicely. Throw in some live music. There'll be food going as well, and you're in for a great night. There's no charge. Come along and join us. I will be behind the bar with all 7 of my aforementioned guests, and through the night we will be pouring wine until the sun comes up or close enough. We'd love to have you along. Some terrific wine by the glass. Sakkie with his full-on misfit, headlining a really cool cast next Thursday, 6 p.m. Culture Wine Bar. We would love to see you there. And then if you are not down in the Cape on the 4th, but you are up in Johannesburg or surrounds, Constantia in the city, the entire Constantia Wine Collective is getting on a bus and heading north, and they're going to be pouring some Sauvignon Blanc from Constantia pretty much through this week and next, but they are culminating in a really big event next Thursday, the 4th of May at Proud Mary. And you can go along to that, 200 Rand a ticket, and that will give you the chance to try wine from all of the estates at the bottom there. You can see everybody who's going to be part of it: Constantia Royal, Steenberg, Baden-Bavachting, Klein Constantia, Groot Constantia, Eagles Nest, Constantia Glen, Bow Constantia, and you will also be able to join the guys at Silver Mist, and that is all being poured at Proud Mary, Thursday the 4th, if you are in the Gauteng area. Right, so that's one big announcement for this week, the fact that we're going to be at Culture next Thursday and having some fun behind the bar with some very cool winemakers. It's not the only event on the horizon. You might remember, and you probably will because it was a tough one to forget if you heard us speaking about it, Roland Peens roped me in to go and join him for what is quite simply the best night of wine I have ever had. We spent an evening in Cape Town at Aubergine, where Harold Bresserschmidt cooked a fabulous menu that nobody remembers because the wine was just dazzling. It was Latour and Lafitte and Petrus and a whole pile of the greats of Bordeaux, and they came together for a night that celebrated both a Strauss auction that was on the way and also sent some money the way of a very good cause. And there were a lot of people who got hold of me from Gauteng and said, "Why are you doing it down in the Cape? Come and do one in Johannesburg." Well, that is exactly what we are doing. So Roland is coming up to brave Johannesburg and join me at the Old Oak at Royal Johannesburg for another terrific night. Roland, welcome back to the show. Lovely to have you on. And lovely to have another one of these to look forward to. First of all, for people who don't know the background, just to remind us of how this Aladdin's cave of wine fell into your lap.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me. Yeah, very lucky enough to be selling the Coates family cellar, which was a very large collection of wine that we helped import a few years ago into South Africa from Europe. It was collected over 4 or 5 decades and holds some of the greatest wines in the world, going back 50, 60 years on many wines, and then back 200 years on some of the wines. So we convinced Mr. Coates to use some of these wines for a charity evening, and we were very lucky enough to do the Bordeaux evening a few months ago. And now it's a time for Johannesburg's turn, but it's going to be slightly different this time, Dan. Not only hitting Bordeaux, but we're gonna take a tour all around the world, which is quite exciting. Burgundy, we're gonna go to Spain, Italy, Australia, and then of course Bordeaux. Some very big heavy hitters in Bordeaux as well.
It is a quite remarkable selection of wine that you've thrown together, and I am already champing at the bit to get through to this one. Let's have a look before we tell people what it's going to cost to get them in. Let's have a look at some of this wine. You mentioned it is around the world. Before we go to France, did I notice that some of the very few good things to come out of Australia are sitting on this particular list?
Yeah, so this collector, Mr. Coates, loved Penfolds Grange. In fact, he had every single vintage, and we're going to be selling a vintage collection of Penfolds Grange later on in the year. Can't tell you too much about it, but there was an incredible collection of Penfolds. He was very akin to the property. So we're going to be tasting one of the greatest vintages, 1976, 100 points from Robert Parker. a really big, powerful wine that already 50 years ago was one of the international icons. So really rare. I've never tasted the 76. Really excited about that one.
All right, so some terrific Australian wine, and this, if you are a South African, this is kind of Australia's way of saying sorry for all of their rugby referees. So it'll make up for it just a touch. So some Australian. We're also heading over to California, Roland.
Not on this one, Dan. That's another event, but on this one we're focusing on France. So we've got Burgundy with Armand Rousseau, Romani Conti, and Coche-Dury, which is going to be pretty exceptional. One doesn't get to drink and taste those wines very often, never mind altogether. They're made in tiny quantities. The Romani Sans Vivant that we're going to be trying is only 400 cases they produce, so very small quantities. And these wines, Dan, are incredibly expensive. They 60, 70, 80, 100,000 rand a bottle, and that makes them even more accessible. And really, that's why we're bringing them all together for those to taste.
I apologize. I got mixed up there with the birthday dinner that Roland is very kindly hosting in my honor. I'll come back to France in a second. I do see a rather appetizing Italian name there, and it's possibly worth reminding people that it's not just the French wines that can command these sorts of prices. There are some Italian wines that are, well, they'll set you back some proper money if you want to try and get hold of them.
Yeah, sure. So Piedmont doesn't have the history like Bordeaux does of hundreds and hundreds of years. Wines were only bottled maybe 60 years ago, 50 years ago. So this is a very special name from Piedmont, Giacomo Conterno, their Monfortino Reserva. It's 15 years of aging before it's released to the market. It's one of the most rare, if not the rarest, Piedmontese wine that you can buy. Traditional style. It only starts becoming alive after 25 years, and we've got a 35-year-old version that we're going to taste from a great vintage out of Magnum. So that's going to be something epic. And then, of course, one of its counterparts from Spain, Vega Sicilia, which is another one of those really long-term aging wines. And we've got the Unico from 1981, which is a classic vintage as well.
Oh, all right. Well, already, I think if you're listening to this, you're wondering, how can I get a ticket and what will it cost? Well, before we tell you that, let's also have a look at Bordeaux, because although it's not exclusively Bordeaux, there are some very, very big names from Bordeaux still coming through. Tell me about these, and in particular about the vintages, Roland.
Yeah, so we're having a little bit of a journey over the evening with some younger wines and some older wines. Often over my 20-year career, I always get asked, when should I drink my fine wines? And I think you need to decide that for yourself. Sometimes I prefer older wines, sometimes younger wines. So we're going to taste a fairly young Chateau Petrus 2005, which is 18 years old, starting to get into its, just out of its teenage years, into its adulthood. It'll be on the younger side, but still obviously exquisite. And we're going to then have a Chateau Pavie 2000, which is now really in its singing window, 100 points. And then one of my favorite wines of all time, Chateau Latour 1982. It's, of all the 82s, it's the best in my view, and it's so fresh and so beautiful. It's just one of the world's incredible wines. And then we'll finish off with Yquem 67, which is another perfect Yquem. And at 52, 53 years old, it'll be singing as well. Sorry, bad math. It's a 57 years.
Well, let's call it 56 and draw a line under that. That's a super, super selection of wine. And it's going to give an enormous amount to everybody who comes along to the evening. It's also, Roland, going to give something back, because a big part of these evenings is not just the education that everybody who goes to these events will garner from tasting such extraordinary wine, but also charities that benefit from this particular evening.
Yeah, so I've been associated with Spiel for the last 5 or 6 years, and for me, it's just an incredible charity because it really addresses the key trauma that happens on the family level within societies in the winelands and the farming communities in the Western Cape, and this community of arts and dramas teachers get the community to talk and communicate to one another, and I've seen the value and what it brings to the community. So this money will help drive that MPO spiel, and they'll really appreciate it. So very happy to be giving back.
All right, so you're supporting Spiel and some terrific work done there, but you are also drinking all manner of absolutely extraordinary wine, Penfold grain through to Latour out of Bordeaux and everything in between. What's this going to set you back, Roland, and how do we get tickets?
Yeah, just send me an email, but it's 35,000 Rand, Dan, per head, which is a lot of ZAR. It's not a lot of euros. It's not a lot of pounds or dollars. But that's the cost of the wines, Dan. And so we need to try and get as much value out of them as possible for the charity. And we've been selling these wines on Strauss and Wine Cellar. This is unfortunately the price that these wines have got to. So it is tax deductible as a charitable donation. So there's a real commercial spin here too, Dan.
All right, well, there we go. That's going to be at the Old Oak at Royal Johannesburg, the 17th of May, 6 o'clock. 35,000 Rand is a lot of money. We are well aware of that. But the caliber of wine you are getting, I can tell you my wine experience with the first dinner at Bordeaux last year was life-changing. And I think this one is going to have a very similar impact. Drop off a mail, Roland at winecellar.coza. If you would like to come along, there are very limited seats for the 17th of May. We would love to have you along. Get in touch, come and join us, and hopefully we see you then. Roland, I'm going to ask you one final question just before we do let you disappear. It would be silly of me not to, having one of South Africa's leading wine authorities on the show. We are celebrating the West Coast today and the remarkable rise of the area. What's your take on this part of South Africa and the fact that in a very surreptitious, a very unhurried kind of way, the West Coast has started appearing on the radar as a seriously good part of the winemaking terroir in South Africa?
Definitely, Dan. We're very young as a wine population or a wine culture. We're only really exploring our exciting terroirs today. And who knows, in the next generation or generations to come, we will have found our finest wine appellations. And the West Coast certainly has incredible parts to it, and we're still discovering it. So I remember going to the West Coast, drinking Sauvignon and eating seafood. It's one of the greatest experiences that you can do in South Africa, but there's other things, and Sakkie and the lot have proved that. So really exciting region, Dan, for sure.
All right, well, let's say goodbye to Roland and head over to the West Coast. Roland, thank you. We will see you on the 17th up in Johannesburg. And thanks for helping to put this together. It's a wonderful night for a great cause, and I can't wait. So we'll see you then. Roland Peens, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Dan. Cheers.
There we go, Roland Peens, that night at the Old Oak. Plus a little bit of insight into the West Coast, which takes us rather nicely into our list of guests for this evening. They come to us from Friars Cove, from Gedeelte, I have to make sure I got that pronounced correctly, and from Sakkie Mouton Family Vineyards, and Sakkie himself. So a warm welcome to Liza, a warm welcome to John, and a warm welcome to Sakkie. Guys, thank you all very, very much for joining the show, and lovely to have you on in celebration of the West Coast. Sakkie and Liza make return appearances on the show, and lovely to see you both. It's John's first time, so let's bring you in and get all the nerves out of the way. John, welcome, lovely to have you. Gedeelte Wines on the West Coast. It's a name that I've just started to see a little bit more of, and it's really exciting to have that happen. Give us a little bit of background. First of all, where exactly you are, and a little bit about the Gedeelte story.
Hi, Dan. Thank you for having me. So Gedeelte Wines is situated in the St. Helena Bay. We are exactly between Bouwer Point in Elands Bay and Stompneus Point in St. Helena Bay. So a lot of people get mistaken, if we are actually situated in St. Helena Bay itself, but we're actually just on the coastline between the two points. It's a stone's throw away, about 3.5 kilometers from the Atlantic Ocean.
And that positioning is going to play a big part in the story we tell today, because it gives you this massive big air conditioner that plays such a role in the creation of wine, which has found its way into the Dan Really Likes Wine Cellar. We'll talk about that a little later. For now, though, give us the background. When did the wine start, and what's your background, John?
So I started in 2015, where I played around with a bit of the Jura wines. played around for a couple of years, and then since 2019, Gedeelte Wines started, selling wine and becoming a business. And for us on the West Coast, we do it a bit different. At the time, for me, starting out with wine, there's so much competition in South Africa, especially there's a lot of good wines in South Africa. And for me, just to try and produce a wine in the same style as the majority of the wine farms in South Africa was, it almost felt like it being useless. So we specialize under floor. I prefer the term under veil, and we'll elaborate about that in a bit.
I certainly will. Tell me about the choice of name. My Afrikaans tells me Gedeelte is part, or means something along those lines. What's given you the name of the brand?
Back in 2019, on our old cart and transport, the farm was subdivided into certain portions. And it appeared that, the Sauvignon Blanc was planted on section 6, direct translation Gedeelte 6, and the Barbarossa and Palomino on section 23. But also at the same time, we like sharing what we do, because it's so much different to just your normal wine methods. We like telling people, the story and exposing to all the wine connoisseurs.
Which is what you're doing. You're also exposing the wine to people like me, and I'm very happy with that. So we'll meet that wine in a moment, talk a bit more about the West Coast. I want to get a feel for this West Coast revolution from Mr. Mouton, who's no stranger to this particular show. Sakkie, I think you first burst to prominence, as we mentioned a couple of times, when Greg Sherwood fell head over heels with The Revenge of the Crayfish, and the world loved a label and then discovered that the wine was even better. It's not dissimilar, albeit over a slightly longer period of time, to this discovery for so many people of the West Coast, where our focus has been on the bigger areas, the Stellenbosches and the Paarls and the Franschhooks and the Himmelanars and Constantias, etc. But the West Coast has been making some very steady progress, and it seems to me that now it's really on the radar of most serious wine drinkers, not just in South Africa, but around the world. Is that a fair reflection of where the West Coast is? And what do you think it is that's pushed the West Coast into this space, Sakkie?
Well, Dan, I think it's definitely on the radar at the moment. I think Cape Wine last year proved that to me. I did not expect people to come up and taste the wines and be like, listen, we heard about this and we've been searching for these wines for such a long time. So I think Cape Wine definitely proved that to me. And I think it's just people are ready for something new, The Swartland has been there now for, 20 years or whatever, and Stellenbosch has been there for a long time, and all the other regions have been there. And I think people are ready now for something new. And I think the fact that the West Coast, has got this interesting terroir, and it's got the oceanic influence. If you look at other parts of the world that are also, you look at Santorini and places like that are also suddenly popping up, and people are seeing these places as a new interesting spot. I think that's why the West Coast, the time is right now. I think people are ready for that kind of style of wines, a fresher style of wine. And I just think the area just has such a magical story, and you almost have to find the beauty in the ruggedness of the West Coast, which makes it even more exciting.
Elaborate for me a little bit about that magic, because it's all well and good to have somewhere that's new and cool, and we often gravitate towards something we haven't seen before. There's a novelty factor to it, but a novelty factor only lasts so long. You've got to be able to deliver something that backs up that novelty and turns it into a product or a space that's got a far longer run, which you guys have done. What is it, in a little more detail, about the West Coast, about the various factors you have that's allowed you to turn this new area into something of greater substance?
Well, I think, Dan, at the start, when I made my first Revenge of the Crayfish, I think my idea was, I was so tired of people telling me that, the West Coast, you're from an area that the wines don't have any ageability. It's all put in, it's bag in a box, basically, all of it. And I was so irritated with that. I decided, I'm gonna show you guys what this place can do. And I think from that first vintage, I was very lucky to to see that the West Coast, like I said, the freshness that the wines have, the fact that you're so close to the ocean, that influence from the ocean, it's like a massive air conditioner. So basically, just the fact that we get that cooling effect in the evenings makes our pHs are quite low, our acidities are naturally high, and for me, my wines don't go through any malolactic fermentation. So I think the freshness that I get and the ageability that I got on my white wines just put it in a completely different class. And then that kelpiness and that almost sea mist, sea spray that you get, it's on all the wines. If you do Sauvignon Blanc, if you do Syrah, whatever you do, you will pick up that kelpiness and that saltiness. And I think that just makes it, it just proves that this place is completely different from any other part of South Africa. And then culture. The culture in the West Coast is, I think you can draw a direct line from the culture to the wines. The way people farm, the way people think about wine. I still struggle a lot to kind of, I feel a bit lonely out there sometimes with the fact that people, I think they still see what I do as a very weird a weird way of thinking. But I think slowly people are starting to get into the idea of, listen, we actually have something amazing here. We just need to think about it in a different way. But I think the culture is so interesting, and if the culture and the wine really starts aligning, I think yes, it's going to be massive, really.
Now, lest we be accused of taking someone like Sakkie, who's got a long history in the area, and being a little parochial, we've also got a guest on the show who's relatively new to the area, having said goodbye to Durbanville and swept up the coast to find a new start at Friars Cove, and one she's delighted in because she's told us this on the show before. But let's get a look at the nature of the West Coast from relatively new eyes. Liza, lovely to have you back on the show, and a warm welcome. Sakkie talking very excitedly about the positive attributes of the West Coast and what they're able to do for you guys as winemakers. How much of a discovery of the West Coast was it for you when you settled in? You clearly knew you were going somewhere different, but how different was it? And what really took you by surprise when you moved into your new space?
Sorry, Dan, can you just repeat? I'm struggling to hear what you said.
All right, we'll try again. Tell me about arriving at Friars Cove and what took you by surprise, what you found really different about your new wine home.
Sure. Dan, would you mind typing the question for me? The signal is very bad and I can't hear anything you're saying. It's a real struggle for me. Yeah, sorry.
No problem. Let's get that out. This is the nature sometimes of such shows. So here we go. Gotta tell me about your new wine region. Ta-da! Let's see if that gets through.
Okay, so I started at Friars Cove about 3 years ago. It was a big change for me. I came from Durbanville to an area that was totally different, but it was exciting for me as well, because it opened up new wine styles for me, and also different areas. The temperature here is definitely much cooler than the Durbanville area, so I knew that I was going to get grapes with a very different quality. And my first vintage was quite an eye-opener for me. I ended up with a wine that had a very low pH, high acidities, which means one thing for me, and that was that this wine had great aging potential. And the last 3 years that I've been here, I've seen that it's quite an amazing area. The temperature is very constant. It's a very maritime type of setup. The temperature never differs between 18 to 24 degrees Celsius, which is very constant, and which is actually brilliant and great for grapes to mature. during the ripening season. And you end up with very consistent wines, very stable wines, and the wines here are very, very exciting for me, very different from what I'm used to. I'm very, very excited about what I've seen here.
And if you've had any of the Friars Cove wines over the last year, or at least some of the new releases where Liza's touch has just started to be seen, you'll know that this is a project that's only going to get more substantial, and one that seems to have lots going for it. The attributes that all three of our guests have already spoken of. But Liza, it can't be all smiles and roses. What are the challenges of making wine in this area, particularly compared to where you were before in Durbanville?
Okay, so for me, my biggest challenge in the West Coast is obviously the rainfall that we get. We don't get a lot of rainfall here at all. We get an average of about 100 millimeters a year, which is extremely low. It's definitely not enough to grow dryland vineyards, so we have to irrigate. We are very fortunate to get some water from Vredendal. We had to dig a pipeline from Vredendal, which is over 30 kilometers away from our vineyards, to get water to the vineyards. And we also have a little desalination plant that is right next to the vineyards, that we desalinate borehole water where the salinity is too high. So we're actually cleaning up the water to irrigate our vineyards. But it does create very special growing conditions for us. So we have to be very careful in looking at the quality of the water when we do our irrigation. So we need to keep an eye on the salinity of the water all the time and make sure that we don't get too much salt into the soil. We already get enough salt from the winds blowing in from the ocean that goes and deposits onto the vines and the grapes as it ripens. So you actually pick up a lot of that salinity in the wine when you taste it. Yeah, so it's quite interesting, quite an interesting area for me.
It's not just an interesting area, it's also one that we don't know much about, which is going to make much of the stuff interesting because it is new to so many of us. Let's jump back to John and just talk a little bit more about making wine out in this part of the world. If we think of somewhere like Stellenbosch, there's a different wine estate every 300 meters. You can't turn around without bumping into one. Things are a lot more sparse and a lot more spread out up on the West Coast. I look in particular, John, at a photo. I think you had this up on Instagram a little while ago, Wolfgat, when you were meeting up with Cobus, and that's where I tried some of your wine over lunch there. And that was a collection of so much wine from the area. And Cobus, obviously a big champion. What is the West Coast network like, given that you don't live quite as close to each other as some of the other winemakers in other regions? Are you still a fairly close-knit group? Do you still work together quite a lot as a West Coast collective?
So Dan, we actually I went to visit Cobus a couple of years ago, and I know Cobus is very big into supporting local, and we actually started getting together. I donated we did some cabbage over winter times on the farm, so I donated a lot of cabbage to an institution in Paternoster, and that day he actually invited me over for a lunch, and that's where we started connecting. So we do have a very a great friendship as well, not for only him supporting the local, whether it's wine or cheese or whomever, but we get along quite well, and it just appeared or happens that I am able to sell him some of the West Coast wines.
And I can tell you they were an absolute treat when they went down over a lunch. It was full of not just local wine, but also local ingredients. And Wolfgat is very, very firmly on the map. You're getting there as well. And I'm seeing a lot more of your wine and more people talking about it. And in fact, you sent some of it up to us. And I want to try some in a second. But what I do want, I'm just looking around myself. Here we go. You sent up a bottle here that was somewhat anonymous. nothing on this. I think from having a look at the website, I know what this is. But just confirm for me if this is the wine that's got your name in it.
Yes, so that started in 2015. I read a lot about a farm called Vinjon in the Jura region between Switzerland and France, and they specialize in undervale wine. It's completely natural, if not none, almost no sulfur. It's not fortified as the sherries in Spain. So that's where it all started. So that was named Vinjon. It's maybe a bit corny in a way, but coming from Vinjon to me being John, and that's a 100% natural Sauvignon Blanc with no sulfur added, matured under veil for 4 years and 6 months, and also not fortified.
And it's also got quite an interesting former name, and quite a long one that I think you probably trimmed down maybe to save some printing costs. Tell me about the original name.
The original name, well, it's never been labeled before. We only bottled this wine this year, January. So there was a lot of names that we wanted to connect to that wine. And I eventually thought, make it more interesting and just keep it plain and simple.
Wow. I'll have to dig up the one I thought might have been there. I'll find that in a second. We're going to be tasting some. Tell me about not just the other wines that you've sent up. We've got some Sauvignon Blanc here. I know you do some Palomino. Or what are the varietals that for you, John, speak to the West Coast? Nice, simple enough to make, but also really reward the kind of terroir that you're producing wine from.
So we produce a Sauvignon Blanc, matured under veil, as well as a Palomino, same process as the Sauvignon Blanc starts. The Palomino and Sauvignon Blanc process actually came from, doing this Vinjon style of wine, being a more prolonged period under veil, where the Palomino and Sauvignon Blanc is a lot shorter. We leave the wine after fermentation under floor for about 2 to 3 months before we send the wine back to French oak barrels. And then we also specialize in a very niche varietal called Barbarossa. It's an Italian varietal. We'll be bringing out a Barbarossa Rosé this year as well. And then that's it for now. We are, though, looking at planting some Chardonnay, as I believe that's the new big thing for the South African industry, and probably add some Shiraz to the collection as well.
Which will get a lot of people interested, because the West Coast traditionally has had a lot of great white wine. We don't often see a huge amount of red wine coming out of there. So clearly Shiraz is something you feel can work. I think I found the name of this. It was previously known as John Strikes Again Under a Veil of Good Fortune. Was that what this was called at one point?
Yes, that's correct. That was not labeled under my name, though, but that was the previous name, yes.
All right, very, very eye-catching and some cool wine. I want to chat to you in a second about the Sauvignon Blanc, but let's jump over to Liza and ask her about some of the new vintages. And I have to type this as I speak. But I've been looking out. I think I've tried a couple in the last little while. The new white vintages, Liza. Are you finding that you're starting to get towards the style that you've been looking for, and are the wines starting to be wines that you feel are not just West Coast wines, not just Friars Cove wines, but also have a touch of Liza to them?
Yeah, Dan. So our latest vintages that's available is the 2022 vintage of the Bambus Bay Sauvignon Blanc and the Hollebach Strandfontein, which is our wooded Sauvignon Blanc. So we only bottle our in November of every year, and this year looks quite exciting. So it was a great year for white wine overall. We had very cool growing conditions, so ended up with some great for this year. Yeah, I think I do love making Sauvignon Blanc. It's always been my favorite wine to make, and yeah, I think I like the style that I make here. It's a combination of classical and New World style, which makes it very interesting. Yeah, for me, I get on our Sauvignon Blancs, I get a lot of what I call apple flavors, some limes, citrus, nettle, lemongrass. It's a combination of flavors, and it all blends in very nicely together. Yeah. So, and we also we revamped our cellar last year, so I had the opportunity to make the Sauvignon Blancs in a brand new cellar this year, which was also wonderful. New things to work with. I also got a lot of new claver pots so that I can mature some of the Sauvignon Blancs in there. So there will be some new interesting styles coming through the end of this year. So I'm looking very much forward to that.
Keep an eye out for them. What about the community that you moved into, Liza, saying about at Durbanville and moving out to this new part of the world? What's been like meeting everybody, settling in and fitting into a new part of the wine world?
Okay, so Friars Cove, as we all know, Jan started Friars Cove in 1999, and he also started a small restaurant called the Gedeelte restaurant with the community. And when DGB took over in 2020, we kept on with that community, with the trust. So we're still a big part of the community. They are still part of the Gedeelte restaurant, and we do plow back into the community every year, and we help to uplift them. We've created a lot of new job opportunities because we increased the cellar of the size of our cellar, the size of the restaurant. So new job opportunities, and we very much part of the community and what's happening here.
Well, let's go to one of your fellow community members and head back to Sakkie. Sakkie, the rise and rise of Sakkie Mouton has gone hand in hand with the rise and rise of the West Coast. Dealing with this sudden wine fame, I remember at Cape Wine last year, it took me about an hour in the queue just to come and say hello and be touched on the forehead by Sakkie and given a small libation of Colombard, and then move on because there are another 1,000 people all wanting to meet the great man in person. The wine's exploded from the not just the Revenge of the Crayfish, but the Full On Misfits getting a huge following as well. I've got a bottle of it with me here now. We're going to be drinking it next week. Has that reshaped what you thought your vision of Sakkie the wine producer was going to be? If you had to suddenly scale up and employ a social media agency and take security out to dinner, how's life changed both for you and for the Sakkie Mouton brand?
No, yes, Dan. I mean, I think the best thing that's changed is the fact that I think people, the people that support me, from the people that's been there from the start, they're still there. They still support me. So I think I'm very blessed in the sense that I still have the supporters are there, and the people who drink the wines and enjoy the wines, like I said, from the start they've been there and they're still there. But there's no security, there's nothing like that. There's no lines. No, I still try and live a very humble life, and I really just enjoy seeing the fact that the brand is actually, it's picking up, and it's been 5 years now since the first crayfish. And it's cool for me to see that people are, like I said, people are buying into the brand and into the West Coast, and people are realizing, that there's something out there, and it's really interesting. And it's just, for me, it's such a blessing to just see people really, going for these wines and really just enjoying them. But no security, it's still just the same Sakkie as always.
And I'm very glad to hear that. I can't see that changing, though, to be honest. Still good to hear nonetheless. The wines to come, what is on the horizon? You got any cool plans, anything that's been inspired from the 2023 harvest that might be added to the list of offerings?
Yeah, yes, Dan. I made a Syrah last year. So yes, like it's like you just said earlier, it's such a struggle to find red, interesting red grapes in the West Coast. And I went searching and I found, there's so many Cabernet and Merlots. And the West Coast is quite far from Bordeaux, so I don't think that I would have wanted to make a Cabernet or Merlot that came from 43 degrees Celsius. So I found a Syrah vineyard that really I think is super interesting. Because it's on those typical West Coast sandstone soils and it gets that West Coast wind. Those vines are really struggling, but in the best way possible. And that will probably be released. The plan is around August. So for me, I think for now, for the coming year, that red wine will be super interesting to see what people think. I think for the West Coast in general, just a red wine that, a Syrah. There's so many great ones out there, but I think this one is almost like the crayfish in that sense, where you can taste it's just something completely different. It's from a different place and it shows. So I'm really excited about that.
I think that's our tasting to be done in the next little while. We'll pair John's Syrah up with Sakkie's and see how they work out. For now, though, it's other wines that hold sway. One of them is the Sauvignon Blanc, John, which is a wine that benefits, as we've said a couple of times on the show, from that ocean proximity. In terms of creating a style of wine, is this something you do a huge amount of work for, or is it a case of the combination and the conditions in that ocean almost helping you to define the wine on their own?
No, so Dan, like anything else, being involved is always, the much better thing to do in any industry. So, from pruning that vineyard, attending to the vineyard every day, and not just the vineyard, vine, every vine, if you give it attention to every vine, to make sure that your fruit is what you want it to be at, when harvesting arrives, then the work in the cellar is just much less than it would have been not attending to it, as you should have. So definitely, like Sakkie mentioned before, we've got a beautiful salinity in our white wines especially. We've got this fantastic limestone soil from about 3 meters downwards, which I believe has a lot of positive outcome for the pH levels, our low pH levels we get in the terroir. And then, as I mentioned before, after that fermentation, we allow that veil to grow for 2-3 months, and then we literally blend that veil into the wine to give the wine longevity as well. For instance, our Sauvignon Blanc, you should actually only open that bottle in 10 years' time. So that's in a nutshell how we work, towards our Sauvignon Blanc.
And having tried some, I can tell you it works rather well. I'm not the only one who's a fan. Lisa Harlow is watching. Sorry I was late. Love the West Coast. And was sorry to miss John a few weeks ago. Rain stopped play next time. Hopefully, she does follow up with always a delight to open one of Sakkie's wines. Still remember my first taste of crayfish, and that of course would be the wine rather than the crustacean, although I'm sure both apply. I had a look, I was having a look a little earlier. You've got some quite famous friends, John. I think Jeremy Thompson from Sky was out not that long ago. You had a couple of big name American distributors, so people have certainly made their way out to visit you. How do we find you? Where do we find you? And are people able to come and drop in and do a tasting and say hello?
Yes, Dan, that was fantastic. I always say any exposure is better than none. So, we are on all social media platforms, on our website. We advertise. We also just, don't just do a tasting. We actually do a proper food and wine pairing where we cook and we serve every dish. The dish starts off by using that specific wine as the base for the dish. And we serve our wines with a proper cooked dish for every single wine.
I think actually, no, you had me sold before we even started, but you've got me extra sold. So I've been planning a West Coast trip that's shot up list of places I need to make sure I get to, amongst others, because it is a little bit of a trek out there, so you want to make it worthwhile and see a few people. Liza is another. Liza, in terms of coming out to visit you, again, is that something that we can do? And aside from just seeing you and seeing your very cool wine, what else can we check out? What else would you recommend if we're in the area of Friars Cove?
Yes, Dan. So we are open every day of the week for wine tasting, as well as we've got this stunning little restaurant called the Gedeelte restaurant, and we mainly focus on seafoods that complements the wines that are made here. And there's loads of things to see here. We're not the only winery around in this area. There's a few other wineries that's also around, 2 or 3 little small niche wineries, then as well as a few bigger wineries like Vredendal, Lutzville, co-ops. And there's specific times in the year that's very great to come and visit here, especially August, September, which is our flowering season. We do get overrun by people that time of the year, but as of late, the last year, I've picked up a lot of people that actually just drive out from Cape Town just for the day, just to come and see what's going on here. They literally drive up, come and have lunch, have a bottle of wine, and then they take a slow drive back down to Cape Town. The people like to do the trip from the West Coast Road, from Langebaan up to Elandsbaai, Lambert's Bay, and then to Doring Bay, and then take a slow drive back, which is very interesting. I mean, it's quite a drive. It's about 4 hours from Cape Town, and there's a nasty piece of little dirt road that you must also be prepared to take. But the people do it, which is wonderful, and we actually get a lot of people every weekend. A lot of people. Yeah. So.
Which I think says a huge amount about your wine, Liza, given it is 4 hours away. One to put in to your wine tasting adventure up on the West Coast. And Sakkie, what about you? Can people come and visit you? If so, where do they find you?
Yeah, I mean, Dan, so at the moment I live in Riebeek West. So I'm 1 week I'm here, 1 week I'm in the West Coast. That's basically how I do things now. But people are always welcome if they want to come for a braai. I'm always open for a braai. But that is at the moment the only way that I'll be able to accommodate people for a tasting. So if people are keen to come for a braai, they're more than welcome. I'm always set up for that.
All right, fantastic. Well, count me in then. And I'll ask you, just before I wrap up with John, for a final question. If I'm heading up your way, we know we're going to visit John. We know we're going to visit Liza. She's pointed out a couple of things. What else for you, the West Coast? What should we be doing other than drinking wine and meeting cool winemakers on a West Coast adventure?
Well, definitely eating a lot of seafood. If you can eat, I mean, that's why you need to definitely come when it's the flowering season. Because then, the weather is nice, and then we can have some wine on the beach. We can catch some fish. If you're keen, can actually organize some crayfish. So, food, wine, and then meet some of the locals. That's always a very, very interesting experience.
All right, so add that to what is looking like an increasingly long. This is not just a visit. This is probably going to be a sabbatical taken in the West Coast, but a most enjoyable one. John, what about you? If I'm headed up your way, your food and wine pairing sounds absolutely sensational. Coupled with Sakkie's braai and adventures with Liza, I've already got a pretty full itinerary. But what should I be adding to it to complete the perfect West Coast adventure?
Dan, well, what we in the past have done, it's starting to become, much more clearer, in the future. We at times, go down to the beach as the farm is part of the farm is on the beach, and then we, at times we, catch some herring, and then we do a tasting with, for instance, a mango and red onion and lemon salsa, where we cook these herring on the beach, rolled in coarse salt. So there's a lot of adventure to it than just a sit-down wine pairing. So definitely something to look forward to.
All right. This is the official West Coast Travel Symposium with Liza, John, and Sakkie. And it wraps up a celebration of an area that I think if you haven't drunk the wine of, you need to do. If you're only drinking some, then drink more. And if you've never been there, then it's slightly off the beaten track, a beautiful, sparse part of the country where some increasingly exciting wine is emerging. One of which I'm having for dinner. I haven't opened it just yet, but I'm spending some time in Italy next month. And so some Barbarossa from John is going to be on tonight's menu at Chateau Nicholl. So John, thank you for that as we make our way through this evening's wine. Guys, it is an official promise to all of you. Lisa, I'm not sure if you can hear, but to Sakkie and John, I know you can. I am headed your way. Sakkie, I'm coming for that braai, and John for that food and wine pairing. I suspect in both cases the next morning might be a little slow out the blocks, but well worth it. And Lisa will be heading your way as well. So guys, thank you. Keep making terrific wine, and thank you for being part of yet another extraordinary South African wine region that's not just doing us proud locally, but flying that flag internationally as well. So to all three of you guys, thank you very, very much indeed.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Dan.
So, Liza and John and Sakkie together, giving us a look at the West Coast wine that I've had for a while, but it was that meal at Wolfgat that set it apart as I tasted so much stuff I hadn't had before, and it just made it really, really exciting to get through. So West Coast, somewhere to go and visit when you can, and in the meantime, experience vicariously through the beauty of their assorted wine. That wraps us up for this evening. We've got some rather interesting people with some homemade wine coming up on the show on Wednesday. Not as dangerous as you might think. I'll keep you posted on that. You'll also see on our social media channels some details on next Thursday, and that is the Dan Really Likes Wine takeover of the bar at Culture. And we'd love to see you along from 6 o'clock. No charge. Just come and drink some wine. You'll have to pay for that, but no charge to get in, and come and be part of a really cool evening. And you'll also see details on that wine dinner on the 17th of May, which I see Angelique Kouvelakis was talking about a little earlier on in the show. The Old Oak is an amazing restaurant, says Angelique. Well, it certainly is. It will be in particular on the 17th of May when we're throwing back Petrus and Pavie and Chateau Yquem and a pile of other great wines from around the world. So do come and join us for an incredible wine experience. That wraps us up for tonight. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we leave you with a reminder of that incredible prize that's up for grabs from Boschendal. Your chance to head down on holiday for a couple of nights at Boschendal and spend some time in a beautiful estate, some great food, some lovely wine, and some horse riding for good measure. Have a great evening. Thanks to our West Coast trio and to Roland. We'll see you back live on Thursday. Goodbye. This is Boschendal Wine Estate, and this is going to be your home if you win one of the coolest prizes in wine this year. It's a majestic prize. Flights for 2 people down to the Cape if required, transfers out to Boschendal, 2 nights accommodation, lunch or dinner at both the deli and the Verf, a picnic if the weather allows, the opportunity to go horse riding, the chance to taste some of the finest vintages and memories to post away on social media for months to come. How to win this incredible prize? Simply go shopping at Norman Goodfellows, either in-store, online, or through the Dan Really Likes Wine store, and buy any bottle of the Nicholl Red Blend or any bottle of bubbles. Do so until the end of April, and you could be on your way to Boschendal.